When LEGO redesigned the Phase 2 Clone Trooper helmet mold in 2022, my first impression was, oh, that's annoying, looks kinda goofy. What I never could have predicted was the uproar and controversy that these new helmet holds would stir up, to a point that, ironically or not, this topic has become unignorably prevalent in the LEGO Star Wars community. So let's talk about it. Why did they make this change? Why add the holds? The reason for this change was pretty obvious, and if anything was long overdue. And it all harkens back to 2013 when LEGO went from this Phase 2 clone helmet to this one. LEGO had been producing visors and rangefinder accessories since 2008, but unlike every Mandalorian helmet and every Phase 1 Clone Trooper helmet, this new one didn't have any holes for them, meaning every Phase 2 clone that needed a visor or a rangefinder, including the 2013 Rex, was shit out of luck. This was an extremely strange decision considering the Phase 2 ARC Trooper helmet that came out the year beforehand did have helmet holes. Fast forward 9 years, and after strong fan demand for a Phase 2 Commander Cody figure, LEGO were pretty much forced to finally deal with this problem, and eventually made the newest Phase 2 helmet with 2 new holes to allow Cody to have his orange visor accessory. So what's the problem? Well, there were actually a few problems with this. In order for the visor piece to sit properly above the helmet's eye line, the holes had to be placed higher up on the helmet. This actually worked out perfectly for Commander Cody because, as you can see here, it's actually accurate to have an extra lump under where the visor connects to the helmet. However, this meant that any rangefinder piece used on any Phase 2 clone, including the new Captain Rex, is placed way too high up on the helmet to a point that LEGO themselves actually renders the rangefinder in the wrong place on the box art for the 501st Battle Pack. They did release a statement about it because it was a mistake, but it was still pretty damning. The next problem was that any clone trooper that doesn't need any accessories now has 2 inaccurate and pretty goofy looking holes drilled into their temples. Now this actually doesn't bother me that much. I don't mind the helmet holes. I think pictures make this problem look way worse than it actually is. I think this change has been completely blown out of proportion, and this is something that warrants mild criticism, not full-on outrage. With that said, these helmets are clearly not as accurate as they were before, and a lot of people do feel very strongly about this, which is fair enough. I clearly care about them more than a normal person should. Like, I'm making a 10-minute video on the topic. Who am I to talk? So instead of just adding fuel to this fire, let's talk solutions. How do we fix these helmets? One of the first things I thought of anyway was, why don't they just move the lower bump to be higher up and just remove the lower circle altogether? This would make the holes look a lot more natural while retaining all compatibility with existing accessory pieces. Well, the issue with that is that any character that uses a visor will be a little less accurate, and it doesn't solve the rangefinder issue at all because it would still be attached way too high up on the helmet. It would also move that bump to be too high up, which is way less accurate than where it currently is, which some people may still take issue with. With that said, I do actually think this would work. It'd definitely be better than the current design anyway because its compromises would either be the same, like with the rangefinder, or affect way fewer figures because you're just trading a little accuracy on the occasional visored character for the sake of making every single other clone trooper look better. If LEGO want the easiest, cheapest fix, I think this is probably what they would go for. But I think we can do better, so let's explore a bunch of other possible solutions and see how they compare. The intuitive thing a lot of people thought of was, why don't they just include holes on the minifigures that need accessories and just use the older mold for the regular clones? Well, that sounds great, and they're already kind of doing it, although that's kind of just a transition period thing. I actually have a few problems with this. It still doesn't solve the issue with rangefinders because characters like Captain Rex will still have them mounted way too high up on their helmets, and they'd still have the empty, weird looking hole on the other side of their head. And much more importantly, as much as us AFOLs would like to believe otherwise, LEGO doesn't care about accuracy that much to a point that they would take away the ability to play and customize clones from anyone who wants to. LEGO isn't exclusively a kid's toy, but pretty much every set with clones in them are kids' toys, and LEGO wants kids to play with these accessories or at least have the option to. Ultimately, I think this is why LEGO made the decision they did. Okay, but what if there's 2 different helmet molds? One for the visors and macro binoculars that's exactly the same as the current one, and one that's the same as the older one where every other Phase 2 helmet would have the holes on the lower bump. This would allow full customization all the time, and it would allow characters like Cody to keep their accuracy while allowing characters like Rex to have the rangefinder at the right height. And the helmet would look perfectly fine when no accessories are in use. Nobody complains about the Phase 1 or Mandalorian helmets ever because the holes are in a natural looking position, and this would accomplish the same thing. Well, the first problem with this is that it's pretty lazy and inefficient. Why would you have 2 versions of the same helmet constantly in production simultaneously when a single solution is possible that would work fine? Also, now you have the extra issue in that the 2 helmets in sets look almost identical, which could cause confusion for kids who don't like that some accessories work for some figures but not others, and that they now need to learn which accessories fit into which hole locations on what looks like the same 2 helmets. If they did this with the 332nd Battle Pack, for example, Vaughn and the regular troopers would have almost identical helmets to a point that they'd need some diagram in the instructions to tell kids who's who. And I don't think they'd ever adopt a design where they would have to do this if it can be avoided. Another interesting solution would be a separate dual molded helmet for visors. This would fix the rangefinder issue, look perfect on normal clones, and allow them to create a more specialized visor shape that can be much more accurate and generally have it be much smaller instead of sticking out as much as it currently does. Having this be dual molded also means that you can recolor the visor part as needed for Cody, Vaughn, and Fox, and actually print onto them because the visor is a part of the helmet instead of being a somewhat delicate accessory that wouldn't work well on an assembly line. This is something Vaughn in particular desperately needed, and if you consider that they already kind of did this for the one-off Commander Cody buildable figure, it feels very doable for them. Like, Lord knows they have the ability and the money to do so. But again, this has its flaws too. It's still creating a second version of what could be the same helmet to stay in production at the same time indefinitely. I don't think it's as bad in this case though, because it's a distinctly different helmet with its own use cases, but you can still make that argument. It's also sacrificing playability because you'd be removing the visor piece from usable accessories, which is kind of a pointless effort since you need it to stick around anyway for the other helmets, which are already using it no problem. And the macro binoculars are designed to work with the Phase 2 clones with the holes where they are. And if you have a specific mold for just the visors and the regular Phase 2 helmets have the holes at the lower bump, then these won't fit properly anymore. Okay, so changing the helmets doesn't seem like it'll work. Well, what if we change the accessory pieces? I personally think that the current visor piece is way too square and simplistic anyway, so why not update it to look more accurate and fit on the Phase 2 helmets from the lower position? If they could do that, not only would the visors look better, but the rangefinder would come from the right spot, and any clones without accessories would look totally fine. The problem with that is that changing the shape would mean that the visors would no longer fit on the Phase 1 or Mandalorian helmet molds, meaning you'd probably need to either keep the current visors around anyway, or make a newer one specifically for those helmets too. Another big problem with that is that these macro binoculars for Phase 2 clones also only work on the higher up helmet hold spot, so you'd need to update those too, and also create a different version for the Phase 1 and Mandalorian helmets here as well, and you can already see that this is getting out of hand. So, what's going to happen? What are LEGO actually going to do to fix this? I think realistically what will happen is that LEGO does nothing at all, and the helmet holes stay exactly as they are. Now, I don't think that they're above reverting a change like this after fan backlash. For example, a few years ago when they introduced the superior Rebel pilot helmet and reverted it after just a single set. But in that case, they were able to revert it back to a previous design, which is a luxury that they simply don't have here. Like, they can't just go back to the whole free design. That would just be a step backwards. I think if LEGO were to implement a change, they would simply remove the lower circle from the current mold. This is the easiest solution that addresses what people are mostly complaining about without needing to redesign accessories or have multiple designs in production indefinitely. Ultimately, AFOLs and the LEGO group have different priorities, so a perfect solution feels unlikely. If ye have some design combination I haven't considered, feel free to share them. I think focusing a discussion on solutions is ultimately the most productive thing we can do here because, let's be real, whatever they do, we're gonna buy the clones anyway, so voting with our wallet is out of the question. I feel like I've said enough about this for now. Thanks for watching, and farewell.